Hi everyone. I thought I would let you know that I've finished marking the first piece of coursework for the Branding and Communications course, and it would be useful to share with you the most commonly dispensed feedback from individual student submissions. You must not assume that all of the following applies to you, but if you see feedback in your own Canvas record that is similar, then you know it does. And it might be that you benefit from hearing about feedback that I've given to other students, because obviously you're going on to do the second piece of coursework. It has to be much more detailed, and it's obviously talking about things that weren't required in the first piece. So we're assuming that you're building on your first piece, but yeah, this feedback might be useful for you. So I'm going to start with a few things that apply to everything, so the first piece and the second piece of coursework. And I'm also going to mention some things that only apply to the first piece of coursework, and probably are just useful to know rather than building in corrections or other things that you need to do for your second piece. Okay, so I'll start at the beginning. Overall, I'm quite impressed with the standard that the cohort achieved this year. I've seen a real benefit of sharing some of the video examples with you that I did. It's the first time that we've done that, and it's had a noticeable effect. So there were some really quite high marks handed out for this first piece of coursework, which is great. Overall, there was a general spread. And some of you do have a little bit more to do in order to reach that standard for coursework 2. But generally speaking, I'm very pleased. So well done. I'll start with the basics. As I said, first of all, some of you are getting caught up in the brand personality and consumer-based brand equity points before you've actually explained what the brand is in terms of a product or a service. So I've had to write on a few pieces of individual feedback. What is this? I'm still not aware of what the product actually is. You're talking about the brand, and that's great, but I still need to know what the product is. So if I've written that on your feedback, just look at it, ask yourself, once you've written your second piece of coursework, would it be a good idea to get somebody else to read this just so they know that I'm talking about an app or a drink or a physical product or a service before you start talking about the actual brand? Aligned to that is the need to talk about where it fits in terms of the industry. Is it business to business? Is it business to consumer? Is it retail? Is it sports and leisure? What's the overall industry that you're working in? That's a good intermediary point between describing the physical product or service and moving on to the brand. This also sets you up very well for describing the competitive landscape. Now that brings me very nicely on to the second most commonly dispensed bit of feedback, which is point of difference. Unfortunately, I've marked several submissions where there is no discernible point of difference between the brand you're describing, that you've invented, and something that's very similar. In some cases, I've even mentioned these competitive brands by name or have given you a website link to look at. Now, this is a very important part of the coursework requirements. And if you haven't specified an adequate point of difference, then there's going to be a penalty to pay in terms of the grade that you're awarded. If that's you, there's a couple of things you can do. In the first instance, I would imagine that most of you who have been asked by me in the feedback to improve your point of difference, sit and think about an extra feature or benefit or aspect to your product, service, or brand that you could introduce that would make it even more different to other offerings, other competitors in the marketplace. If it's a slightly more extreme version, if I've said, look, this is way off mark, or there've been a couple of occasions where, as I said, the brand is more or less identical to something we all know, then you've got two options. Either take the first route, as I've already said, and try and make it more different, or in extreme cases, you can do a complete rethink. Okay, it is possible to just tear up the script and start again if you think that would help. So you don't have to stick with the same brand in coursework 1. I don't recommend it, but if you don't think there's any way out, then that is possible. Probably the third most commonly dispensed piece of feedback is about applied theory. Generally speaking, it's obvious that you all know the subject matter, and it's obvious that you're working from textbooks. But sometimes that theory needs to be applied in a slightly more obvious way. And think about the big hitters. Think about Acre, think about Keller, think about Capferer. These are very well-known frameworks that tell you what the personality of the brand can look like, what the physical attributes are, both from an outward and an inward point of view. That's Capferer's prism, obviously. And then use Keller to describe how you're going to establish consumer-based brand equity. Okay? You really need to use this theory. You really need to apply this theory. And any submission that isn't making reference to that, especially in coursework 2, is again going to pay a penalty. Okay, 2 more points that you can carry with you into coursework 2. Number 1 is the research. When you're making assertions about who's going to buy your product, who's going to use your brand, it's extremely compelling to use research to back this up. You can't argue with that. So try and do a bit of secondary research to embolden the claims and the assertions you're making about your target market audience. It's extremely convincing. And I've seen a couple of fantastic examples where students are saying, well, look, this is a thing. And for example, one student wrote that 80% of all retail customers will split their shop between different stores to save money. That's a fantastic quote. You can't argue with that. And if you're building a component of your brand on top of that assertion, or something like that, then it's money in the bank, basically. So yeah, think about research and think about how you can use it to prove what you're creating. The other thing, and it wasn't a particular requirement in coursework 1, but better submissions did mention it. Think about how you're monetizing this brand, because that's going to be central to how you build brand equity. If you're asking people to part with money, where's the money going? How are you making money? There were a couple of submissions, and as I say, it wasn't an absolute cast iron requirement in coursework 1, but how does the brand work? How does it make money? Who are your customers? What are they paying? Is it a subscription-based model? Is it a pay-as-you-go model? Is it an indirect model? Think about that, because that is going to be required for coursework 2. And just before I finish, a couple of things that I would mention on coursework 1 only. Again, it's not really going to make an impact on the summative assessment, but I thought you would just like to know. Overall, I really enjoyed the presentations. A lot of you got really invested in the production values. The only criticisms I had of some of the presentations were the sound quality was a bit ropey in some of them. Some of you haven't learned how to use a script well, and you just read from it, and it made it very difficult for me to understand in places. You know where I am. Reach out if you need me. Deadline's still a couple of weeks away. I hope you're all well. Take care.